traditionally, the lack of eye contact is interpreted as a psychological thing. Oh, he doesn't like me, or it's too frustrating or anxiety producing to look at me. But that's not the case. It may be that he sees two of you. He may be having double vision, or your head may be going around in circles. And if that's the case, not looking at you and listening to you is easier than dealing with the symptom of double vision or inefficient vision.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited because I have a special guest on today on Mother's Guide Through Autism. So I want to welcome Miss Lemer, Patricia Lemer, and she's an author, a teacher, a speaker, and
a counselor. My licensing is in counseling.
Yes, and so with that said, are you still practicing counseling?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm doing some pro bono work online, and I'm trying to retire, but it's really hard.
Well, selfishly, I hope you don't, because I know that you're still creating and giving us so much knowledge. So for any mother guides listening out there, you're going to want to get a pen and some paper, and you're going to want to take notes. Luckily, the way podcasts work, you can listen to it over and over again, so that's the good news. So let's just start out with your background. Okay. And how you came to work with children and adults with autism.
So I was fortunate that about age 12, my mother was doing some volunteer work, and she came home with some tests that she was giving to some elder people in a nursing home. And she was trying to figure out what they liked and didn't like so she could arrange some activities for them. And I was a good math student, and I said, this is really cool. You can test people and figure out their interests and their abilities. And she said, oh, yes. And I said, age 12, this is what I want to do when I grow up. Wow. And fast forward, I poured, this was like the 50s. So I poured over college catalogs and found a major in psychology and mathematics, a double major at Simmons, what was called Simmons College. It's now Simmons University in Boston. And that's where I decided I was going, and I was going to learn how to do these testing. And it was such a gift because it really melded my interests. And I just loved figuring people out, and I loved the mathematics part of it, the science of it. And so I got my first job in a hospital in Boston where I was a psychologist working with kids. This was 1969, where there was no autism. And the people I was working with had cerebral palsy and Down syndrome, and some had had accidents, car accidents, or had fallen out of trees. And I was trying to figure out how to help them. And I was part of a multidisciplinary team with occupational therapists and speech pathologists, and it was headed by a neurologist who was using very innovative techniques such as diet to help people with cerebral palsy and Down syndrome. And it was such a great introduction for me because I loved being part of the team. And so this was the late 60s. Then we moved into the 70s where they wrote the law for people with disabilities. and they mandated special education in the schools. And because I was already involved with disabilities, and living in Washington, D.C., I was fortunate enough to be part of writing this law. And we had something called learning disabilities, which, like autism, are kind of invisible disabilities. And we got learning disabilities mandated as a special education category in the schools. And then in the 70s, that was the 70s, and then in the 80s, along came something called attention deficit disorder. And people thought, well, that should be a disability, but that failed as a disability. It is not one of the categories of the 14 categories for the schools, because nobody could quite agree what ADD was and who had it and who didn't. But there is a loophole in the law under other health impaired that people with this condition can get services. But we're still in the 80s not talking about autism. And so it wasn't until the really late 80s, early 90s, and your son was born when?
92.
92, that he was really the first epidemic, the first really big year of when we saw autism. And because I'd been in the field 30 years, not quite 25 years, I was already an expert in disabilities. And so getting into autism was kind of a natural thing. And so I was seeing these kids who were different and nobody quite knew what was going on with them. And then we started using the term autism. And in 93, again, before there was an internet, a couple of us sat down and said, look at these kids. They're qualitatively different. They're not learning disabled. They're not cognitively impaired. There's something else going on. And as my job testing these kids, and that's what I did for all those years, from what I decided I was going to do when I was 12, I was conferring with a mom, and I said to her, I've seen kids like your son, but I don't know what it is. And she said to me, nobody's seen anybody like my son. He's unique. And I said, he is. And he has characteristics that are similar to some other kids. And she said, well, what do I do with him? And I started asking her questions, and it was a Friday afternoon, and I kind of knew I was tired from a long week. And she said, well, how do you know he drinks a lot of milk? And how do you know he had a vaccine reaction? And how do you know that he twiddles his fingers in front of his eyes and doesn't give me eye contact? And I said, because those are some of the risk factors and symptoms and commonalities among kids like your son. And once we figure out how he got there, why he's doing those things, maybe I can help you. And she said, wow, if I'm not alone, maybe we should start an organization. She said, I'm a lawyer and I specialize in nonprofit organizations. Let's start a nonprofit. And I thought, well, that sounds cool.
Why not?
She says, do you know any more smart people like you? And I said, well, I know an OT, and I know a speech pathologist, and I know a nutritionist. And she said, well, let's call them and let's sit down. And we all got together, and before we knew it, we started a nonprofit called Developmental Delay Resources, which was actually, it was called originally Developmental Delay Registry. And we changed the R to resources because people didn't know what they were registering for. And we really were a resource organization. And we published a newsletter, and we had conferences, and all without an internet. And we sent out a survey, that parents filled out. Almost 700 people filled out a survey in 6 weeks using snail mail and no internet. And we published it in parent magazines. And we saw that we were on the right track trying to help people, that there were these commonalities. And I ran that organization from the mid 90s to the late 2000s. And in 2013, I merged it with another group called Epidemic Answers. And now I became the board chair of Epidemic Answers, and they're a very exciting organization. They're doing some serious research, and your parents might want to fill out their CHIRP study, CHIRP. And the CHIRP study is a long, long questionnaire. But if you stay with it, you can get an Amazon gift card and you can contribute to the research for autism and other developmental disorders. It's not just about autism. So I've had a long, varied career that started when I was really 12, and I was really focused on doing what I wanted to do. And a little bit of time in there, I did some career counseling because it was so fascinating to me how I fell into this field. And I wanted to help other people find their passions, and especially people with autism who have many passions, and how to turn those passions and sometimes obsessions into a career is a fascinating field for me.
I love that. Yes, that is something that I too love. When I was in the classroom, that is something I taught, was helping kids find a purpose behind their education. So I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And yes, there are so many passions. I know for my son, Joseph, who is on the spectrum, he has many passions. And so, and that's a tough choice when you're working with an autistic adult, because that they, you know, he in particularly struggles with making the right decision. You know, if I don't make the right decision, there's a lot of pressure there for him. So
Well,
yeah.
maybe you can help him a little by saying, you know, we don't learn so much from our right decisions. The way we learn is from our wrong decisions.
Mm.
And we learn from adversity. And so we all have to have adversity to keep moving and to keep growing. Those who haven't had much adversity in their lives are still searching for meaning.
That is powerful. Yes, yes. And I absolutely will. Joseph will listen to this. And so he's going to hear your beautiful advice. So
Oh,
thank
good,
you.
good, good.
I, your first book called Envisioning a Bright Future, Interventions that Work for Children and Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorders. So can you tell us, and I know you cover the visual issues, and I've learned so much from you already with visual issues and autism, and how often they're overlooked. And you know, my son's 28 years old, and I knew about vision, but I didn't know about vision. So I'm guessing I'm not the only one.
Right,
So if
right.
you could talk to us about how you got interested in vision, and about the book in particular, and what we can learn from you.
Great. So when you say in English, someone has vision, Steve Jobs had vision, um, and Barack Obama had a vision. People think about vision as something that happens in your mind and in your mind's eye. And a vision is not the prescription in your glasses. So in English, we use vision and eyesight synonymously, but they're different. The eyesight that we have is just the clarity of what we see.
Mm.
The vision is what we do with what we see. It is giving meaning to what we see. So when someone looks at you, when a baby looks at the face and smiles, that is recognition. That is something that goes way beyond just seeing it clearly. When we look at our watch and we say, I'm late, you have done a whole lot of thinking and turning the big hand on the 5 and the little hand on the 12 into a concept. And so that's the first thing that I want your listeners to understand, that when I use the word vision, I'm talking about the interaction between the eyes and the brain. That is conceptual, organizational, imagination. And this is what many people with autism lack. Now, how do you get vision in the first place is through body and space experiences. It's when we move through space. Again, an area that people with autism don't like very much often. They have trouble with their coordination. Sometimes they walk late. Sometimes they have eye-hand coordination. And again, it's not an eyesight problem. It could be that they're a little bit nearsighted or a little bit farsighted, but often it is more of a binocular problem, that their two eyes may not be sending the brain the same message simultaneously. So if the eyes aren't working together, the brain is getting this kind of information and it's like, yikes, what do I do with that?
Yeah, I can, very confusing if that were to be going on. And what an
Right.
aha for some of us that are just, really putting that together.
And if you're looking at me, I can't tell by looking at you whether your brain is getting simultaneous information from your two eyes.
Right.
It takes an important specialized vision exam that goes beyond that sight at 20 feet. Does he have 20/20? Most of our kids do have 20/20. They can see that chart. Sometimes they have a little blurriness at near point, like those of us who are over 40, and they need maybe some magnification. But sometimes it's often that they don't have good binocularity, or they may not have good visual flexibility. So every 8 inches in space requires them to refocus and refocus and refocus from the book to the teacher to the blackboard, social distance, computer distance. Those are all different distances. And a good, efficient visual system learns how to do that from experience. And learning is a key word there, because we learn how to use our vision in a predictable, systematic, developmental fashion. So we know how babies use their vision for recognition, and we know how kindergartners use their vision, and how adults who are well organized use their vision efficiently. So when we look at someone with autism, we see symptoms that they're not efficient. And that may be just the lack of eye contact. And traditionally, the lack of eye contact is interpreted as a psychological thing. Oh, he doesn't like me, or it's too frustrating or anxiety producing to look at me. But that's not the case. It may be that he sees two of you. He may be having double vision, or your head may be going around in circles. And if that's the case, not looking at you and listening to you is easier than dealing with the symptom of double vision or inefficient vision.
Yeah.
So that we have to think about, what are those symptoms? A child that stims may be trying to jumpstart an eye that's not working with the other eye. And sometimes it can be very obvious. You may see an eye turn. You may see crossed eyes, both eyes turning, or one eye turning when the child's tired. It may turn in or out, or up or down, and that's called a strabismus. And sometimes an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist, may recommend surgery for a strabismus to straighten the eye. He interprets it as a muscle problem. And often these surgeries are not successful because it isn't a muscle problem.
Yeah.
It's a brain-eye coordination problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if the eye becomes cosmetically straight, the brain again may not be receiving the information in a coherent fashion. So we have to help that child learn how to do that. So the first thing we need to do is find the right kind of eye doctor who can do a complete eye exam of vision and not just eyesight. And that eye doctor is often an optometrist, not an ophthalmologist who's an MD and learns about pathology, but an optometrist is like a PhD in eyes. He is also an eye doctor. He's an OD, a doctor of optometry, and he went to 4 years of she went to 4 years of graduate school just working on the eyes and vision. And then some optometrists go further and do postgraduate training and become a specialized kind of optometrist called a developmental or behavioral optometrist. And your listeners can go to a website called COVD, College of Optometrists and Vision Development, and put in your address, and they'll find you someone locally. And they ask you how far you need to go. Now, you're in Arkansas, so I was able to go into that database and find you somebody who was not around the corner, but within we found somebody within an hour or so of you.
Yeah, it was Northwest Arkansas.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah. So can you repeat that, because I want to make sure I've got it.
Okay, it's C like college, O like of or optometry, V like Victor, and D like dog, COVD.org.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So I'm really interested in checking out who you found for my son Joseph, although he's 28.
Never too late, Bridget. That's never too late. Because especially with high functioning adults like your son, who our goal is to work independently, this just makes them a better version of who they are. They have what might be holding them back are visual inefficiencies. And we can help them because they can state to us, I have a goal. I want to hold a full-time job. I want to learn how to drive. I want to live independently. I want to get married and have a baby. You know, all of these things. You say, well, what does that have to do with vision? Remember, vision, you want to see it in your mind's eye. You want to visualize it, plan it, organize it, conceptualize it before it happens. And many of these optometrists work with high functioning athletes to do just that. That baseball player puts, I am going to hit a home run in his mind's eye before that ball hits the bat. That tennis player puts, I am going to serve an ace before he actually hits the ball. So when these optometrists have their practice, an office might have people with autism at all different levels, as well as high functioning athletes in the office learning how to use their vision efficiently.
I just think this is so fascinating. And, just what I've read and listening to you, I am so excited. And here I am 28 years later, because I believe that this is a missing link for my son.
It's a missing link for so many kids and adults. And it's just, I didn't learn about vision. Remember, in the late 60s, I was doing play therapy and trying to help kids. I didn't learn about this till 20 years later. Not till the late 80s did I meet my first optometrist, who, when he did a vision exam on me, it was so different from any other eye test I'd ever had. And when he showed me vision therapy, that I could learn how to use my eyes, and how he used all kinds of apparatus to get my body moving in space and to get my eyes working together, it was just fascinating to me. So I've become a very good friend of optometry and have worked as a bridge between the public in the disability world and optometry, in both teaching the public about the power of vision and vision therapy, and teaching optometrists how to talk to schools about learning disabilities, kids who have reading problems, who skip lines, kids who make, quote, careless mistakes. All of these are possibly underlying vision problems. And the optometrists weren't very observant, and pardon the pun, when the law was being written. And so vision therapy is not a related service in the public schools, unfortunately, like occupational therapy and speech and language therapy. So we have to figure out how to get the schools to understand the power of vision and what vision therapy can do in the long run to save the schools money and saves the schools time and save kids a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I'm just, because I was a teacher. I was in the school system for 20 something years, and I can tell you that I'm an educator and have not
Would have
been
never
willing
heard of this.
at the level, the deepness of this topic. And like most of us, when I get passionate about something, look out, because I think back on, Joseph pointing out of the corner of his eyes, because of all the things that you're saying. And I'm just thinking, okay, so vision equals then, well, is it really a motor skill issue? Or is it coming from the vision and the way the brain and the eyes are working or not working together?
So there's, you had the symptom. It was right there, him looking out of the corner of his eye, but nobody said to you, Bridget, get this kid the right kind of eye exam. And maybe you did go to an ophthalmologist who said, look, he's 20/20, he doesn't need glasses.
Exactly.
That's only a piece of the puzzle.
Right. All I knew was, and all the information when asking that is, well, it's easier for him to
Right.
pay attention using his peripheral vision versus looking at you. And so I thought, well, then, I'll just make sure his teachers know that. We'll just move on. I was like,
So,
oh,
some kids with autism are more peripheral, and some kids with autism are more focal or look right here. And you can tell by their behavior. Those kids who are more right here are those kids who can find the dust in the carpet and are who are very limited in their visual flexibility. And one of the things I say in my book is that inflexible behavior is a sign, a symptom of inflexible vision.
yeah.
And as we loosen up the vision, we loosen up the behavior.
Oh, this is, again, I know I'm not the only one, and I'm so thrilled that I have this on Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast, because this platform's all about knowledge and offering hope and inspiration, and just hearing that, having that connection and understanding is so big for anyone who hears that. And I just think to myself, Joseph, I believe, was hyperlexic, which he could read before he could speak. And so I'm starting to put all this puzzle of all the missing pieces together from just getting to know you. And it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And there are a couple books written now on visual issues in autism. And I give you those titles in my book. And there are all kinds of optometrists out there doing this vision therapy. Not all of them work with people with autism. So you have to not only find one who's trained, you've got to find one who's trained and familiar with autism, because some of those kids are hard to work with.
Yeah, that is true. So how would parents know if that is true of their child? So we're talking about symptoms, many individuals with autism
Right.
that have.
Every child with an autism diagnosis should have a developmental vision exam. You don't even need to see the symptoms, because sometimes you can't see them, and kids learn how to compensate. And you don't know what you don't know. And I once saw a child, and I said to him, "Do you ever see two of something?" He was like 12 or 14. I said, "Do you ever have double vision?" "Oh," he said, "all the time. I can see two heads. You have two heads." His mother nearly jumped out of her chair. And she
Oh,
said, "You never told me that." And he said, "Mom, you never asked."
that's about right. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
I know.
Yeah.
And he's trying to control that all the time. So you go to the website and you find an optometrist. Some of them have 5 letters after their name. They have F, like for fellow, COVD. Those are more highly trained people. So if you have a choice between someone who has an FCOVD and someone who does not, I would go with the more highly trained one. Now, it takes a long time to get trained, and there's some good optometrists out there who are not fellows. But I wanted to touch on one other organization. There's an organization called the Optometric Extension Program, OEP. And OEP has many pamphlets for educators. You said nobody told me. So they have something called an educator's guide. They have a pamphlet called Vision in the Classroom. They publish a pamphlet that I wrote called Attention Deficits, a Developmental Approach, and looking at all the symptoms from the DSM-5 of attention problems and saying, these could be vision issues. These could be sensory integration issues. These could be nutritional issues. So you have to look at all three areas as you do with autism in attention deficit. What is the child eating, drinking, breathing? Is he living on gluten and dairy products to which his body is having a reaction? And the eye is the nutritionally most demanding organ of the body. It is eye doctors. You say, you shared with me something that you have as a health issue. That health issue is often picked up first by an eye doctor because they see changes in the eye. And the eye doctors see that and refer you to someone who is a nutritional expert. So we see this often with kids who have nutritional deficits. And any of the kids with sensory integration problems, because the lower level senses like touch and movement and the vestibular system happen earlier, they lay the foundation for vision. And so if you're seeing an OT, we need to educate the OTs about vision. Now, some OTs have educated themselves about vision, and they're crossing over a line and doing vision therapy when they should not be doing vision therapy. They should be working collaboratively with an optometrist who can guide them on how to do vision activities.
Yeah, and that is so much great information, and my brain is just working and working, taking it all in. And so if we look at breaking it down, what can be done to help those with autism learn how to use their vision more efficiently? So we have steps in place. What are some things that we can do to help our kids?
Well, the first thing is you want to make sure that they have any acuity problems, any eyesight problems are corrected. Okay. Some of our kids with autism are farsighted. They can see that chart 20 feet, but it's blurry at near. And we don't think about that typically with young kids. Optometrists also use prism lenses to help ground kids with autism. So their use of lenses can be therapeutic as well as used like mine are for distance as crutches. So we want them to use these lenses to kind of give the brain a jump start on what life might be like if their eyes worked together. And those are temporary lenses. There's another pamphlet that OEP publishes called Learning Lenses. And that explains how those are used to help the eyes work together. But that is done under the auspices of an optometrist. Now, we can help kids by giving them compensatory techniques, like this online learning that's taking place now is very stressful for so many kids, especially those with vision problems, because the computer distance is a different distance than seeing the blackboard or a social distance. And we're making them spend many hours a day at this computer distance. So we want to give them vision breaks. Every 45 minutes to an hour, we want to let them walk around and do some big motor activity like climbing or bike riding or something like that. We also might want to transfer what's on the computer to a piece of paper. So the math that's on the computer might be hard for someone to focus on. And if you put it on a paper that has grid lines on it, like a piece of graph paper, it keeps the columns lined up. and you can blow it up and make it bigger so that it's easier for them to focus on.
Wow,
So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would never think of that.
yep. Well,
Yeah.
there's an optometrist named Sarah Lane, and Sarah Lane is in New Jersey, and she's actually published on her website some ideas for this of Zoom learning that the kids are having to do now on how to make it easier. She has 2 school-age sons, and she's not letting them do their work on Zoom. They can listen, but she's transferring it to paper, and she wants it to be that way because it has to be in 3 dimensions. 3-dimensional learning is so different than 2-dimensional learning. And that's the way the body works, and the mind and the eye. When you put your hand in your pocket and you're looking for a coin, your fingers by touch can tell the difference between a quarter and a penny. Yeah. Just by size.
Yep.
And so that developed from your experiences as a young child. And that combines touch and vision, because you could visualize that coin without seeing it.
Yes, and I think the comprehension of the learning, I mean, you're going to remember things if you can touch them, right?
You are.
That kinesthetic piece of
learning. The kinesthetic learning, right.
That puts it all together.
There's a great book. It's called Thinking Goes to School. It was written in the 70s, and it has become a classic. And it's written by Harry Wachs, W-A-C-H-S. He was a pioneer optometrist, and the book is still available. It's on Amazon. Thinking Goes to School. And his co-author is Hans Furth, F-U-R-T-H. And Hans Furth is a Piagetian expert, a Swiss psychologist. And in my book, I talk about the Piagetian steps of child development and how they relate to vision.
Yes, I think I remember a little bit of that in my schooling to become a teacher. And I think it's so important for parents to have all this information, because, you know, it's not something that you think about unless, you know, you have a reason to think about it.
Right,
and it's like,
right.
What are so these resources are essential to anyone that's listening. And I do believe knowledge is power. So the more we talk about this, the more we share this, the more kids, the more teachers, this is how we do it, right? And
right.
Another piece of this fascinating puzzle is behavior. So when we're talking about improving behavior, referring to vision, everything that we've been talking about, how does behavior play into all of this?
It's a great question. So there was a famous occupational therapist named Jean Ayres, Jean Ayres, A-Y-R-E-S. And Jean Ayres was the one who developed the concept of sensory integration. And she's got some classic books out there if you want to read more about her. But what she said was that every behavior is an adaptive response.
Wow, everyone needs to absorb that. You might want to say that again.
Every behavior is an adaptive response. Behavior has meaning. You don't change behavior without thinking about why is that behavior occurring. And any of these behavioral programs like ABA, I believe, are disrespectful of that child's attempts to compensate for his underlying deficits. So if a child is stimming, if a child is not giving you eye contact, those behaviors are trying his best to adapt. Now, when he adapts, he may not adapt in a socially acceptable way. He may throw a temper tantrum.
Right.
He may scream and cry. Now, that's when you can intervene and you can say, I know it's hard. I know you're doing your best. I know you're trying to adapt, and this behavior is not an acceptable way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So use your words, or let's calm you down. And maybe you're hungry. And maybe you have other things going on. What did you have for lunch? Oh, it's the day after Halloween. Oh my goodness. Maybe you're in sugar overload. So we have to think about what are the causes of the secondary behaviors that go with the primary ones, which are symptoms of the underlying problem. And we can say, that's not acceptable to kick and scream. It's not acceptable to hit mommy. We have to find another way of saying, I'm frustrated. I need help.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with when we discover vision, how does the behavior improve with vision? Like, what is
You
the
start,
correlation?
all of a sudden you're getting better eye contact. All of a sudden you're seeing that the child's able to pay attention for more than a millisecond.
Yeah.
That the child has better attention, that he's not skipping lines when he's reading, that he is making transitions without a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
That when you say, I know it's 4:00 and your lesson is supposed to start right now, but the teacher's caught in a traffic jam.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't have a hissy fit.
Mm-hmm.
And these transitions are a big part of autism behaviors where these kids are not flexible, and we have to help them become more flexible. And all the behavior modification in the world will just suppress their need to show their frustration unless we get to the underlying cause.
Yes. So to me, it's no different than checking out all the auditory sensory
That's
issues,
correct.
which
Correct.
is more talked about, more well known. And so if you're out there looking for information, so it's very common to, see a child cover their
Right.
ears because of the auditory processing going on that isn't working. We've got this whole thing here with vision as well.
And it's called visual processing.
Yeah.
And if you use that term visual processing disorder instead of a vision disorder, then you don't get confused with the eyesight problem.
Yeah, that's really good because using the right terminology gets us to the resources, the ones that we're looking for.
It does. Yep. And the relationship, since you brought up auditory, I just want to talk about briefly the relationship between vision and audition. So how do you process what you hear? Guess what?
I don't know.
You use your vision.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm going to give you directions to my house and you go down Negley Hill and you turn left at the church at the bottom of the hill and you go 2 stoplights and you turn left on my street where there's big stone pillars, guess what happened in your brain? Did you picture that church? Did you picture the 2 stoplights? Did you picture those stone pillars? You sure did if you're following my directions. And if you don't picture that, you hadn't tried to memorize those words. There's a church at the bottom. Okay. Oh, is that the church? Where's the church? Oh my God, that's not a church. That's a school. I don't know where to turn. If you then say to me, I'm going to give you directions to my house, and you say, let me get a pencil and a paper, guess what? I guess that you're not visualizing. You've got to write it down so you can see it to then turn it in to a concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of my friends who's a famous optometrist named Lynn Hellerstein is in Denver, and she has a whole series of books teaching kids to visualize. And it is, her books are called See It, Say It, Do It.
See it, say it, do it. That makes so much sense when it all works together. It's not doing one, we need to do it all. I see that. Yeah.
And so auditory processing depends, efficient auditory processing depends on efficient visualization skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So thankfully, and you and I were talking just a little bit about this before we started the podcast. In your book, Outsmarting Autism, how it covers so many different therapies. And so, we were talking about how overwhelming that it can be. And as a life coach and teacher, I always try to get my clients to meet themselves where they're at. So that helps, to prevent overwhelm. And so I feel like this book, Outsmarting Autism, is meeting yourself where you're at. So it's a beautiful book.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And, considering that, so it's a reference book. So I'm going to let you talk about it. And how the different therapies and what it offers for parents who are listening.
Well, it offers you 5 sequenced hierarchical steps to helping your child be a better version of who he is. And it starts with lifestyle. Before I get into any of the therapies, I look at how are you living? What are the toxins in your environment? Anything from dryer sheets, which are one of my pet peeve toxins, to toxic people who are not encouraging of you and your child.
Yeah.
And so we look at what are you eating, drinking, breathing, how much sleep are you getting before we run off and hire therapists and get special education and counseling. And you would be surprised at how many lifestyle changes people can make and what a huge difference they can make in a child's life. And I could speak for an hour on sleep. Our kids are not sleeping well. They're not getting good quality sleep. In my book, I talk about making the bedroom a sleep sanctuary and how to do that. And how you can turn off your internet at night and how that changes the whole quality of the sleep, and to making the room dark and make sure that the bed isn't next to an electrical outlet. There's so many things that you can do. I then look at how we got where we were. What are some of the bad things that we got in, and what are some of the good things that we didn't get in? So step 1 is taking the bad stuff out and putting in the good stuff. And that's a long, long section on what you're eating, what you're breathing, and maybe some nutritional changes and some dietary supplementation.
Yeah.
We then look at the child's birth and what some of the structural issues might be. And there are sections on chiropractic, osteopathic medicine, if a child had a difficult birth, and a chapter on reflexes. And the reflexes are another really missed area. We're born with all these programmed reflexes in the body. And if the pregnancy was difficult, if the birth was difficult, if the child had limited movement experiences, there may be reflex problems. And I can recommend for you someone you can have on who can talk a lot about reflexes and what an important missing link they are.
Yes.
Then we look at the sensory issues, and people are familiar with the occupational therapy issues and senses. And I have a whole chapter on vision. Vision, I pull off as a chapter on its own. And not till then do I get to behavior and learning and talking. And talking is like what parents value most, and having friends. But not till 3/4 of the way through the book do I even get to speech pathology and the relationship between vision and movement and diet and reflexes and talking. And so those have to take a back seat to all the foundational pieces. And that's why the subtitle of my book is Build Healthy Foundations for Communication, Socialization, and Behavior at all ages. So we got it all in.
Yeah.
And then the last part is planning for the future. And so, Bridget, that's where you are, and you're looking at revisiting some of these earlier pieces like vision that you may have missed. But how do you prepare a young child to vote tomorrow? You know, this is a wonderful opportunity to teach him, if it's his first presidential election, to vote in. What a responsibility, what a right, what a privilege to vote in this democracy.
Yeah.
And then how do we prepare them to drive, to cook, to do their own laundry, to live independently, to get a job, to have a girlfriend, and what the laws say, what resources are out there. And then the last chapter is on prevention. And that's where I want my young couples a year before they think about having a baby, because healthy parents have healthy babies. And how to prepare their bodies, the mother's body to hold the baby, the father's sperm to make a baby, a viable baby. And we're having an epidemic of infertility. We're having an epidemic of miscarriages, and those are unviable pregnancies that are terrible losses to the couple, and we should be grateful for, because those are babies that would have had a very, 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 very difficult life. And we want our children to have an easy life up to a point. Remember, I said they need some adversity.
Yes. Yes.
Some things need to be hard for them, and we want to keep pushing them and challenging them. And if we know that the risk factors, for instance, a low thyroid in the mother, are risk factors for having a child with autism, well, why wouldn't you take care of the mother's thyroid prior to getting pregnant? That's an easy fix. And so those are the kind of things that are in my prevention chapter. And it's been misinterpreted as preventing people with autism. We're not out there to prevent you. And the neurotypical people who, the high functioning autism people who are saying, I'm different, fine. I accept you the way you are. I am not trying to change you. It's in your hands to determine how you want to change. What changes, what challenges do you have that you're interested in overcoming? And that's where my book is helpful to them.
I think that's really important, because things get misinterpreted all the time. And the intention here is simply, and tell me where I'm wrong, but the way I'm taking it is that here is the information that I have. And Now you choose, and
Right,
I often say to mother guides, listen to your intuition.
right. You know best.
You do. And so I always you I always said, you know, at the beginning I didn't know what to do. So I was on this constant hunt. How can I help Joseph? How can I help Joseph? How can, you know, what do I do? Just tell me what to do and I will do it. And so once I would find different strategies and ways to help my son, I just simply shared it with other parents and moms. And this book is saving so much time because you have all these resources in one beautiful book. And what I just want to emphasize so much, guys, is that knowledge is power, and use it how and what your intuition says to use it. And it's just that simple.
I think we agree 100% on that.
Okay, great. So something that, because I do work with autism moms, and that they want to, you know, when you first get that diagnosis, it's such an emotional, um, really hard time. I mean, it really, really is. There's a lot of grieving that goes on. There's a lot that goes on when you first get a diagnosis.
Right.
So what are the top 3 things that you would advise parents to do right away when their child gets that diagnosis?
Wow, that's a tough one. I would say the very first thing is that the day that you get your diagnosis, your child doesn't turn into a different person. Your child is the same child you have loved and taken care of and nurtured as he was before somebody slapped this label on him. He's no different. And I don't like labels. I don't like labeling kids. And um, the cliche that I like is labels are for cans, not for people. But I I understand the reason for the label and the diagnosis because they access resources.
Yeah.
So a child is not his label, and that's number one.
Yes, beautiful.
Number two is that um, I would look at lifestyle before I go jumping into expensive therapies. As I said, look around you and look at who you are genetically, because I think this can be very helpful, and look at what your environment is, because autism is a result of epigenetics. It's a result of a combination of environmental triggers to a genetically vulnerable person. And so once we know what those genetics are and the environmental triggers are, those we have control over. And we can work with people who understand the interaction there and can make suggestions as to how to get those genes not to express themselves, specific genes. And once they have expressed themselves, how to turn them off and make them work better. And, you know, we see some commonalities with the MTHFR gene and the SUOX gene, which are both involved with detoxification. And that's a common problem in autism, that we have been exposed to toxins and that they don't detoxify. So how do you get those genes working better, and how do you detoxify? So get more information from your genetics and your environment. And I have in the book what I call my everyday epigenetics evaluator. And that is available in the book. It's also available online at warriorparents.org. And that's a couple, Len and Cass, who have come a similar path that you have come, and they coach parents, and they have put my everyday epigenetics evaluator online, and you can take it online, and it helps you look at what your risk factors are. So
Great.
that's
Great
good.
information. Yes.
And I think the third would be to learn some stress management techniques. Anything that helps you take care of yourself, because it's like being in an airplane. You have to put your own seatbelt on before you can help your child. And the many moms, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, have put their own health needs and their own emotional needs aside to be the best mom they possibly can. And the way to be the best mom is to put your own seatbelt on first.
Yeah, and I love that, because that is my main message working with autism moms, is the self-care pieces. And you're right, I absolutely didn't do that. And as a result, I have a lot of health issues now, but that's okay, because
It's not too late for you either.
no better, do better. No better, do better. Yeah, and that is great, because I know that initial diagnosis is very difficult. And yes, we do forget about ourselves in all of it. And you can't really show up for your child fully if you're not showing up for yourself. So
You're right.
I love that message. Is there anything you would like to mention before we go?
Um, Maybe one. I have a radio blog podcast also that I hope you'll be on soon.
Love to.
It's called the Autism Detectives, and it's on healthylife.net radio. It's on twice a month, on the second and fourth Tuesdays at 10 o'clock Pacific time and 1 p.m. on the East Coast. And it has an archives of about 6 or 8 lectures. And so people can go to healthylife.net and look at all shows, click on all shows, and listen to some of my past shows by looking at the schedule. And I'm on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock because it comes from the West Coast. And if you know of anybody else who I should have on my show, or if you'd like to be on my show, you can reach me. My email is developdelay, one word, DEVELOP delay @gmail.com. And I have 2 websites. I have outsmartingautism.com, which is my book's website, and I have my own website, which is Patricia Lemer, LEMER.com.
Wonderful. And yes, we'll be sharing how people can get in touch with you and connect with you, because I am pretty sure they're going to want to.
Okay.
Yeah, I am just so honored, and I can't thank you enough for all your
Well,
work.
thank you, Bridget. And let's thank Joy Newman, who put us together.
Yes, ma'am. She's
Joy's a
also
long time friend.
yes, yeah, so Joy's going to also be a guest, and
Good.
I love networking with all of you. That's the whole point of this journey, and what we're trying to do, and that's help people.
Right, right. Well, good luck to you, and thank you for all you're doing. And as I said, if anybody wants to ask me questions, I would prefer that you buy my book first or get the ebook on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of the other places online you can get it, so that you have a foundation before you email me and ask me questions, because some of the answers are in the book.
Yes, and I also highly recommend the Outsmarting all the books, the 3 books, if you want to tell us again what they are. So moms listening out there, go ahead, get on Amazon, because I am devouring these books.
Well, I think Outsmarting Autism, Build Healthy Foundations for Communication and Socialization and Behavior at All Ages is the newest book, and it has incorporated the other 2 books, Envisioning a Bright Future. This is the expanded, updated version of the original Outsmarting Autism published in 2014. So the newest one is really the only one that you need. And it's got it all in there.
Well, and the teacher that I am, I got all of them. Because I just thought, oh, I just want all these resources. But I
Good.
will say that exactly what you're saying, the later edition, the one that has all 3 books in it, is the one that I'm currently devouring. And again, it's so awesome because it meets you where you're at. So you're not going to get overwhelmed. The book is thick, it's big, many
It's
pages.
600 pages.
There you go.
But the best part is the index, and I didn't do the index. I had a wonderful indexer, and as you said, it's a reference book. People are going to look up their favorite topics, and that's really easy to do because of my fantastic index.
Yes, 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 yes. So definitely a must buy. So I want to thank you again,
Thank
Patricia,
you, Bridget.
for sharing all your knowledge and expertise with us on this journey of autism. And I would love to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to come back.
Okay.
And tell your listeners, I'll tell your listeners, that they're welcome to email me. They're welcome to listen to a lot of different podcasts that are on my websites, and they'll learn more with those and with the book. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great talking to you. You're doing wonderful work.
Our honor and pleasure. Thank you as well from Joseph and I. And be safe, be well, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.